about musicians, there's a great, one of my top recommendations would be the autobiography of Miles Davis. If you're researching about Black American classical music, because his personal experience is like integral to the entire story, and the relationships he had in the first half of his career were a direct connection to the people that made what we're doing now possible, the originators of this modern improvised music. So Miles' autobiography is great. Other than his, Kansas City Lightning, it's the one about Bird, Charlie Parker. Between those two, you'll get nearly the first half of the history just in the names they mention. And I think that's important too. Like if you're going to use the books, like you can get more information out of a book than what's printed on the pages. Like when you use one of these, check those names out. Like why did he mention this guy? Like who were their heroes? Who did they read about? Those are kind of more about individuals and their own experiences. But if you want a broad view of what like day-to-day life was like for musicians at times before now, or what they really thought, my absolute favorite book by musicians, by Arthur Taylor, drummer, called Notes and Tones. And it's a text version of the interviews he gave in person to musicians, through the 60s and early 70s, maybe even late 50s. He got nearly everyone. You can get most of the tradition out of the guys he interviewed. And everyone who isn't in there, I'm pretty sure, is mentioned. Yes, there's any university with any type of jazz department is using material written by Black artists or recorded by Black musicians. Those classes that teach jazz is like a performance outlet, especially. There's books about like George Russell, like the Lydian Chromatic Constant, David Baker's How to Play Bebop. But those are more like, there's not a whole lot of methods or like instructional books from early on. There's like those artists that are still with us now and still putting things out. Like Ron Carter has a few bass books out, for example. Yeah, almost any recording that's referenced, vocal, horn, or rhythm section. Most of the jazz history books are full of Black artists and musicians from there. You couldn't have a jazz history book without. I'm not. Well, here we do have, outside of music, just in general, a concept called HBCUs, or historically Black colleges and universities. But they're their own thing separate from music. Typically in music, formal schools aren't established. They're almost, instead of a school like a campus or a building, it would be an individual. For example, Victor Wooten in Nashville, he has a Wooten Woods. It's something sole proprietor, his own property, his own teachings, fundamental. He brings in artists. Yeah, you would go to someone instead of a school if you had the option. Barry Harris in New York, he still does weekly master classes, private lessons. He's in his 90s now. I know here in Georgia, over in Savannah, the late great Ben Tucker, he was a school for many people. That's usually how we learn Black classical music. Always find an individual to learn from, whenever possible. There's a lot here if you think of it that way. Not so much schools where it's formal, like an education, or you need scholarship or something like that. The guys, people that you want to go to, they have a way of being able to tell who's serious and who wants it, and like they will welcome all those truly seeking. I have never visited Africa, but I would love to. There's so many places. Like, there's things I'm curious about because they seem so distant, but I want to know more. I'm not sure when we'll be able to again. This whole pandemic thing, but like, that is definitely on my list. Like my bucket list. I have to. Like, go see home once. Oh, what was next? What do I know about African culture? Not nearly enough. I feel like everything, by the time I hear it, it's been, I don't know, the information has been passed through so many hands. It's like, I feel like it's a really watered down version of what actually exists. I don't know. It's very like, I don't want to have like a Hollywood image of Africa. I want to see what it is. Because the pictures I see from like ground level are like, they're like someone would take with a phone or something, completely different from like what I would see coming from the media. Like Africa on an Instagram post and then Africa like in a movie is like two completely different things. But those dichotomies are present everywhere, so I've always been very curious. African musicians, I'm actually excited because I just learned some of this. I'm going to start Lino Lueke. Insane. I didn't realize it before finding out now, but the ability to like, he sounds different from other people I've heard from here because of his traditional influence from Africa, and I didn't know that. I just thought it was just, when you hear something that cool, you kind of, it's easy to write it off like, oh, that's a creative mind or someone who works hard, but it's like, that's something I would not have found because it's traditional African music isn't present here. Like, but bass players, Richard Bona and Abraham Laborio, like both session like legends, even doing live stuff. Like they played like on some, not classics, but you know, like Abraham specifically, he's been on like some top 40 stuff for like years and years and years, decades. But I just realized that he was another native African. Like that's so cool. Yeah, even the things that they do over here, like in the community, like in the community of musicians, it's not just performing like on a local level. Like hundreds of thousands of people have heard these guys play without even realizing who they were. Maybe even millions. Yeah, they play with like some huge pop stars over here. That's so cool. I didn't realize they were African. That's cool. I actually know very little about African culture. Like, I think most of what I do know, I learned this year from meeting musicians from Africa here in Atlanta. So, performed a concert with a musician named Shola Emmanuel, and he had this song. I couldn't sing it because I don't speak the language, but it's called a BOA. But, it was reminiscent of a folk song from Nigeria, I'm pretty sure. It is just, what I noticed in my ears is like the Nigerian folk song, it kind of floats. It wasn't like American or Western music is just kind of just so straight and narrow. It's like everyone was singing a different part of the song, but it was still together. And like that's something you hear in like earlier jazz music. Well, hopefully in any of it, but it was cool to see that element outside of jazz for the first time. So many people here were credited like, oh, a lot of what we do came from Africa, but people from here only see it on this side. It was really eye-opening to see it from its source. Another reason why I have to go someday. I'm 100% open to working with African students and using the resources I have myself. Like, to me, the whole point is to get as much information as I can and put it in as many productive sources as possible. Like, I've worked with one African student before, but it was just like a virtual thing, like not during COVID. This was years ago when I was an undergraduate, doing kind of a FaceTime lesson. But it worked well then. It's weird to get the hours right, but we can work it out. I would work with the students just for the experience for me too. I'm sure I would learn things. And teaching the basics, one of my favorite things to do.